Hello my creative friends, it's time to take another art break, and today we're going to finish up this Woodland series with a little bit of a Valentine theme with this sweet little hedgehog. She's got really fun colors on her, and I love how the little hearts are coming off the spines on the back. I'm going to walk you through the steps of how I do the acrylic painting, and then I'm going to show you how you can use some different mark making tools, colored pencils, and some different pens to add all the little scribbles on her and create this whimsical style. For those of you who'd like to paint along with me, but perhaps drawing's not your thing, I do have a sketchbook membership. That's where I have all of the tracers for any of the paintings I do on my YouTube channel. Now this little series does have some standalone patterns, so you can go ahead and click on that QR code. That'll take you over to my Ko-fi page and you can get all the information there. I so appreciate all of you who leave a comment. Give me a thumbs up. It really does help YouTube kind of push it out there and can really help my channel grow. So I appreciate everyone who does that, as well as my sketchbook members. You really do support my channel and I appreciate you doing so. Well, let's get started and I'll show you how you can create this little hedgehog Valentine cutie. Once I've created my own hand drawing, I create a tracer for it. I print it off on my printer and then I use tracing paper to copy my image on to be able to trace it off onto my black paper. So I lay my image down, take my tracing paper, copy over it, turn it over, add some additional pencil, and then I can flip it back onto my black paper, go ahead and trace over it with a pen the large images, and that's where I'm going to start to be able to do a trace and paint option. For this particular painting, I am going to be painting on black watercolor paper. I do have some links down inside of my description box for some of the items I used to create my painting with. You can use any black surface that you have. I do recommend using a flatter black paint. That'll just help create this little scruffier type of technique that I'm going to be showing you using these scruffy little brushes. For this particular technique of painting, I like to use a scruffy brush, and one of the brushes I like to use is a children's brush that I found at my local Walmart. The bristles are a little bit stiff, but they're also soft enough to be able to create this painted look. With this painted look, it's more of a wet dry brush, meaning that there's a little bit more paint in it than what a dry brush technique would be, but not overly loaded. You can rinse your brush out with water, but always press it on a paper towel to get any water out. Then you're going to scrub your paint inside of your brush, load it up that way, and then you're going to create kind of these little soft C marks and scrubby marks in your painting. You want to brush your paint on in a direction of a way that fur would actually grow. I'm going to be starting with my my darkest color, then I'm going to be using my medium color, and then very last will be my lightest color that I would be using in that area. So this one I started with a darker brown, then a medium red brown, and then this light little cocoa color of brown. If you purchase the Trace and Paint bundle, you'll get all of the information of the paint I use, the colors, and if you're inside of my sketchbook, you'll also get that as part of your membership. Now for his face, I'm going to be using the same technique. I'm just using warm white on his face, and I'm going to be doing the same thing where I scrub and load my brush that way, and then when applying it onto the face area, I'm going to be stroking that paint in with how the fur would be growing on his face. It's going to take more than one layer, so you're going to put it on, let it dry, and then you're going to be adding another layer. You don't want to cover up all of the underneath colors, so you want to be able to see some of those other colors poking through. That just is going to add to the layered look of your paint. I'm also trying to leave just a subtle bit of the black paper showing in between the areas. That's just going to help create this really fun technique or look of having the dark lines as your shadows. That's going to be your black paper that you're leaving open and poking through those areas. I'm going to be starting on the clothes, and I'm going to be using a turquoise and a green for those bases. I'm going to start out with my darkest turquoise color, and then I'll be layering on lighter shades of blue after that. You can't quite see that dark green, but the dark green is going on the collar of this little gal, her little scarf, and the cuffs of her little jacket. When I created this little trio bundle of the woodland animals with just a little Valentine twist to them, I wanted them to look like they all belong together. So the one way I did that was I used the same paint colors that I had used on my other ones and continued on with those same colors on each one I created. For the basket and her pocket area, I went ahead and painted them white. I knew I was going to add some lighter colors on the top, so I brightened those areas by starting with white. Her face had had plenty of time to dry, and the colors have shifted more to a darker color. Because I'm painting on black, there's usually a color shift. You're going to need more than one layer of paint. I'm still continuing on putting it in that very much that scruffy pattern of how the fur would grow on each layer that I'm applying. Now that her clothes have dried, I'm going to be starting to put on that medium shades. So I'm starting with a medium shade of blue and going over those areas in pretty much the same way I did with the turquoise. I want to try to leave some of that turquoise showing, and you will, because it's a very uneven amount of paint that you're putting on. And I'm also trying to leave those dark areas between her arms, her shoulders, her area of her scarf, and her basket. If you can leave a little peaks of the black showing through, it'll add a very much an interesting look in the end. For the greens, I've chosen this medium shade of green and then that lightest shade of green off to the side. That one is a translucent color, and if yours is translucent as well when you choose it, you might need to add just a little bit of white so you can see it better once you've painted it on those black areas. The black paper or the black paint underneath really does affect the end look of your colors, so often with a translucent color, you need to add just a tiny bit of white to be able to see it. When doing her little clothes, I'm still staying to the idea of that I'm putting my brush strokes in the way and direction of what the fabric might go. So around her neck, I'm doing it going across or horizontally. And then on her sleeves and her jacket, I'm going to put my brush marks in what would make sense of how that fabric might lay. For the little berries on the top, I put in a bright shade of red first, and I use that same shade of red for the berries on the outside. I'm going to be layering in brighter shades of pink and a little bit of fluorescent pink paint on top of those berries to really make it pop. For that little basket to brush in, I brushed in a little bit darker color just to add a little bit more dimension in that area. Now I'm to the point where I want to add my smaller details, so I can still use my tracer. I'm just going to lay it back on top, and I'll go over any of the small details like the eyes or where I want to have the smile in or drawn in. It really does help to put the tracer over top of those small areas so you can line up your facial features a lot easier that way. I'm going to be making her eyes black, and I'm using a very small round brush. I often will have a little bit of water in that black paint, put my brush in there, and then I twist it as I'm pulling it towards myself, and that creates a nice sharp little point. That's a great little way to add those small details is you use a small brush with a little bit of water and then twist that paint and turn your brush, and then you're going to have a nice little sharp point at the end. To create her nose, I mixed a little bit of gray paint using some black and some white. I gave my painting plenty of time to dry to make sure those eyes were dry, and now I'm going to be working just a little bit on the background. I first painted in the hearts using just the white from his face, a solid color. And then now I'm adding in a few details to the berries. I look at my tracer to see how I had the berry pattern kind of laid out, and I just use that as a suggestion of how to paint the berries. Up next is to add a little bit of shading, and I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch angle brush to be able to create my shadows with. First, I had dipped it in water, and then I tap it onto my paper towel until I see all the shine gone. Then once the shine is gone, I just tip the corner of my brush, the one that's at the angle, in some paint, and then rub it back and forth on my palette to disperse the paint from dark until light. And then I keep the dark end that I have dipped my brush in to the outside of wherever I want the darkest shadows to be. So around his ears, around his face, and on one side of the eyes. I usually like the darkest shadow on the outside of the eyes. I use that same brown color to add some shadows to the basket to deepen those areas. I'm also going to be using a red color. It's a bright red color that I use for the berries. I'm going to be using that for the shadow areas for my pocket. I'm doing the same watercolor float technique of dipping my brush into the water, tapping it on my paper towel until I see the shine gone, tipping it into the corner, and then rubbing it back and forth to disperse the paint from dark to light. And I'm just carrying that shadow line underneath the edge of the pocket and on the edge. To add the berries on the outside of the vine work, I'm using that same shade of red that I had used to create the shadows on the pocket and just simply dipping the end of my paintbrush and tapping the berry shapes in. This is a great way to add simple round shapes to any painting. Up next, I'm going to be using one of my favorite paint colors on these black background paintings. Liquitex Basics Acrylic has a line of fluorescent colors, and the color fluorescent pink is one of my favorites. This is going to look great on the berries. I'll be adding a little bit of it there. On those outside hearts, I'll be adding some of that as well. And in the little tiny berries, any place I want to add just a little bit of brightness, I'm going to be adding this fluorescent pink color. It's very translucent and it slides over and just adds a little bit of brightness without being too overpowering. I'm changing up how I'm putting on my paint on these layers. These are more of the detail areas, so I'm not using the dry brush look anymore. I'm using more of a blended paint technique. So I'm double loading my brush. I'm putting on a little bit of the light pink, adding just a little bit of that fluorescent pink, and blending the paint as it's wet right in that area. I'm using a very small brush in this area as well too, because there's such small details. To create the sparkles in her eyes, I'm going to be using my favorite tool to do this, and that is a stylist. Stylists have little small round balls at the end, and they work perfect for adding these small little details. To add the highlights, I go to the right side of my one eye and just add a single dot. Then I go to the opposite eye and add the bright white highlight on the right side of that eye. If you do it this way, your eyes won't look wonky. The highlights will be on the exact same side on each eye, and that just makes a real cute looking eye is if you create your highlights that way. Keep your dots on the same side of the eye. Now to create those little blushed areas, I'm using a scruffy brush. This is a nylon brush. It's fairly soft. I dip it in my paint and I scrub it on my palette, but then I always put it on my hand and rub it on there. And when it feels dry, I know I have removed enough paint to get a really pretty little cheek of a blush look. I like to use two different colors as well. I start with a coral color and do that first. Then I let that kind of dry. You're not adding a lot of paint, so it's going to dry really quickly. And then I'm using that darker shade of red and adding the next layer of red on the top. That's just how I like to do cheeks. Whatever works for you, go ahead and create your cheeks, what works, the style you like the best. Once the cheeks have all their blushing, I use my stylist and I pop in a couple highlights on her cheek. I'm also going to be using the stylus to create a center for the berries. I try to vary the center area, so some are in the middle, but then I put some more to the top, and that's just going to create that look of having different directions on your berry. Let your painting dry completely, and then we're going to start the pen work. I start with a micron pen in the nib size of a 01, and that's what I'm going to be using to create her eyelashes and her tiny little eyebrows. Micron pen is a permanent ink, so if you need to go back over it with some sort of watercolor float in the end, you can. And then actually I do. I actually add more watercolor floats. Once I get to the end, I decide I need to darken her up a little bit. So I do go back over that, but I don't have to worry about my micron pen smearing or anything like that because once it's dry, it's permanent. On this layer, I will also be adding some color pencils and some of my chalk pencils. The chalk pencil I like to use is the General Soft Pastel Chalk Pencil. This is going to add that little wispy quality and adding all the little scribble bits. It's one of my favorite things to bring my characters to life is to add all of this whimsical line work. I'm adding some white now, but I'm going to be adding some purple, some browns, and some golden colors. These are fun whimsical characters, so you can add whatever colors that you like to add. If you're a sketchbook member or if you purchase the Trace and Paint bundle, there's a reference sheet in there with a photo of the painting that I created. That'll just give you some idea of the line work that I created. I always encourage everyone to do your own thing, use the materials that you might have. This is supposed to be a non-stress, just fun painting opportunity. So use what you have, create, relax, and do your own thing. At this stage, there's many ways to finish a painting, and it most certainly doesn't have to be done the way I finished mine. Do whatever makes you happy and just have fun creating this little whimsical character. As a little tip, if you're doing all three characters, you might want to take your pencils or your tools that you use to create your line work and put them all together. So when you do your next painting, you can use the similar colors. That way they will all look like they were meant to go together and part of a set. To create the background for my piece, I'm going to switch back to my little scruffy brush and use that wet dry technique of applying the background paint. I'm starting with a light blue color, and then I'll be putting the dark blue paint over top of the light blue. By layering these two colors, it creates this real pretty, almost subtle, cloud-like background. Once my piece is all dry, I'm going to give it a coat of some clear coat of matte varnish to seal in all of my pencil work. I was going to be using a frame to frame this piece, and it has a particular size, so I want to lay my glass down first, trace around it, and then I'll be cutting out the shape. Sometimes when you finish your piece or you think you've finished it, after looking at it a while, you might want to add some more colors. And I've clear coated my piece and I can easily go over it because it's just a matte varnish. So I added some of the colors that I had used on the outside of her fur in that hedgehog background and the brown parts of her. I took those colors and I added a few more watercolor floats to her face. So around the outside, on her ears, I put a little bit on the darker side of her nose on the top side and then on the bottom as well. But because I had added a little bit more dark, I needed to come in with my colored pencils and layer on a few more layers as well. I decided to brighten up those little outside hearts a little bit more, so I used my pen that is a Jelly Roll pen in some fluorescent color, and then I did add a little bit more of the fluorescent pink too to make those hearts pop even just a little bit more. Let that all dry, and then I went ahead and added a few more layers of the clear coat on the top. Well, let's take a look at her when she's sitting with the rest of the collection. And here they are, looking cute as can be. I love the little bunny and the little whimsical look, and the little foxy gal and her fish is adorable. And that little hedgehog with all of her sweet little hearts and her little basket of berries looks so cute in her frame. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really can help my channel grow. If you enjoyed this tutorial, here's some more you might want to check out. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.